My name is Naomi Sterling. I'm 34 years old. And before I tell you anything else, I need to say the ugliest part first, because if I don't, this becomes the kind of story people like too much for the wrong reasons. I betrayed my husband. Not once. Not in one reckless night I could bury under shame and bad lighting and a lie I told myself because I was lonely. I betrayed him repeatedly, deliberately. In stolen hours, I kept dressing up as confusion because the truth sounded too ugly in my own head. And for a long time, I believed betrayal would be loud when it finally came for me. I thought it would sound like shattered glass, a slammed door, a voice raised so hard the walls remembered it. I thought ruin, if it came, would at least have the decency to announce itself. I was wrong, because the most dangerous kind of devastation doesn't arrive screaming. It sits down across from you at your own kitchen table, folds its hands, and asks a calm question in a steady voice while your whole life is still standing there, not realizing it's already been marked for demolition. I was married to Grant Sterling for 6 years. We met when I was 26 and he was 28, and even then he felt older than everyone around him, not in age, but in discipline. Grant worked in commercial real estate development. He didn't sell dreams. He built them slowly through land acquisitions and investor meetings and zoning battles and spreadsheets that looked boring to anyone who didn't understand what they were becoming. At the beginning, I thought his job sounded dry. By the end, I understood it was the perfect mirror for the kind of man he was. Grant never rushed, never overshared, never wasted movement. He believed in foundations nobody admired because they were buried underground. I used to laugh about that. I used to say he treated life like a construction schedule. He would look at me with that unreadable little half smile and say, "That's because most people only care about the building after it's finished. They don't think about what has to hold it up." At the time, I thought he was being overly serious. At the time, I still mistook careful for harmless. We had one son, Eli. He was 14 months old when Grant left. That means he was 5 months old when I started the affair. Even now, writing that in my own mind feels like dragging broken glass across something tender. 5 months. My body still didn't feel like mine. I was exhausted in the marrow of my bones. Grant was working impossible hours on a project he kept saying would secure our future. He believed in that phrase, secure our future, the way some men believe in prayer. And I was lonely. Not the glamorous kind. Not the kind movies make seductive. I was lonely in a damp, domestic, humiliating way. Lonely in between bottles and laundry and half-finished conversations. Lonely beside a good man who was so focused on carrying the weight of our life that he stopped noticing how invisible I felt inside it. That is not an excuse. It is only the room where the bad decision first learned my name. The man was Declan Rowe. He was reckless in all the ways Grant wasn't. Easy laughter, fast answers, eye contact that lingered half a second too long. He made ordinary moments feel lit from underneath. He was the kind of man who made boredom feel like a personal insult and spontaneity feel like courage. At first, it was just conversation, then jokes that leaned too private, then messages. Then the line moved, and once it moved, I kept helping it move again. I counted, which tells you something ugly about who I was then. 47 times over 8 months. I counted because I thought numbers made it matter, made it more honest somehow, made it into a real relationship instead of what it actually was, a sustained failure of character. Grant found out on a Thursday. I still don't know exactly how. He came home at 6 like he always did. He washed his hands, kissed Eli's forehead, asked if we had enough milk for the morning, started dinner, moved through the house with that same quiet competence I had once found comforting and later found boring and now would give anything to experience one more time without knowing what was hidden inside it. He bathed Eli. He read him the same picture book he always read. I could hear his voice through the baby monitor from where I stood in the hallway pretending to fold towels I'd already folded. Then he came downstairs. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. He placed both hands flat against the wood and said, "How long, Naomi?" I remember my whole body going cold and then hot so quickly it felt like being pushed underwater and set on fire at the same time. I said, "I don't know what you mean." He held my gaze. "Declan," he said, "how long?" There are moments when the lie dies before you do. You feel it happen. You hear how thin your own silence sounds. I said 8 months. He looked at me for a very long time, not stunned, not wild, just still. Then he asked, "Is Eli mine?" That question did something to me I still cannot describe without hating myself, because that was the moment I understood the affair had never lived in some sealed compartment. It had reached into every room, every certainty, every tenderness, even our son. "Yes," I said immediately. "Yes, he's yours." "How do you know?" The timing, I whispered. There's no overlap. He nodded once, as if I had given him a figure he would verify later. I'll want a DNA test.
Grant.
I said I'll want a DNA test. I started crying then, which felt obscene the second it happened. My tears in that moment felt like a performance my body was putting on without permission. I'm sorry, I said. I know how bad this is. I know. He cut in, not loudly. I'm not interested in your apology tonight. I'm interested in whether there is anything else I should know. There is something terrifying about a person who stays calm when your whole inner world is collapsing. Anger, at least, feels participatory. Anger meets you in the fire. Calmness leaves you burning alone. No, I said. There's nothing else. He stood. I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight. Ask your mother to take Eli this weekend. We'll talk Saturday. That was it. No accusations, no shattered plates, no scene. He walked away like a man leaving a meeting early because the decision had already been made. I should have understood then. I didn't. I told myself he was in shock. I told myself he was containing it. I told myself the fight would come later, followed by grief, followed by counseling, followed by the slow, humiliating work of trying to stitch torn fabric back together. That is what I expected because I had grown up on stories where pain made people louder before it made them leave. Grant was never loud. My mother took Eli that weekend. Saturday morning, Grant came downstairs fully dressed, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He set one in front of me and sat down across from me at the same table where he had asked the question that split my life in two. I've thought about this, he said. He then spoke for maybe 10 minutes without pausing. He wanted a divorce. He had already spoken to an attorney. He was not interested in reconciliation. He would move out the following week. A paternity test would happen before custody discussions became formal. He would not participate in drawn-out conversations about why I had done it. I stared at him. You already called a lawyer? Thursday night, after I went to sleep. That detail lodged itself in me like something sharp and permanent. He found out Thursday evening, fed our son, looked me in the eye, waited until the house went dark, and then he began. What about us? I asked, hating how desperate I sounded. What about trying? He looked almost sad then, but not uncertain. Some things can be repaired, he said. Some things can't. I know the difference. I remember the silence after that sentence more vividly than anything else from that morning, because it wasn't the silence of hesitation. It was the silence after a lock turns. He left the following Tuesday. 2 bags, nothing dramatic. He paused outside Eli's room, stepped in, kissed our sleeping son on the forehead, and came back out. I stood in the hallway holding my own breath so hard I thought I might faint. He didn't look at me when he passed. He wasn't cruel. That would have been easier. He was composed. And composition, I would later learn, can be colder than contempt when it comes from someone who has already started building the world after you. By Wednesday, his phone was disconnected. By Thursday, the number still didn't work. His employer said he was no longer with the company. His parents knew what had happened, and his mother's voice when she spoke to me was the kind of controlled disgust that leaves bruises anyway. I stood in the kitchen with my son on my hip and told myself Grant would come back, because people don't just evaporate from their own lives. But Grant did not vanish. He relocated. I just didn't know that yet. 3 weeks of silence passed. 3 weeks where Eli played in the sunlit kitchen we had shared, unaware that his father had already built a new life without him, or me. I hired Vivian Cross, a family lawyer who did not waste words. Sharp, precise, and unflinchingly efficient. Vivian's first order of business: locate Grant and establish paternity before any meaningful child support conversation could happen. I thought this was straightforward. I thought we were still in the world I had imagined, where the house, the baby, and the illusion of control gave me leverage. I thought the day I hired Vivian, I had power. I did not. Vivian immediately discovered the first devastating truth. The house was no longer mine. Not mine in any meaningful sense. Weeks before leaving, Grant had transferred it to an LLC. My name, the name I thought guaranteed security, had already been removed. I sat in her office, staring at the screen, my hands pressed flat to my thighs, trying to imagine how someone could dismantle my life quietly, methodically, legally, while I still slept under the same roof. The deed transfer occurred 6 days before he left, Vivian said, her voice calm. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. 6 days. He had been home. He had fed Eli. He had smiled at me. He had carried on as if nothing was wrong. And yet, he had already removed me from the only stability I thought I had. He planned this? I whispered. Vivian said nothing for a moment. Then, it's not impossible. Some clauses allow the primary title holder to remove a secondary holder under certain conditions. We need to investigate. We did. I called Leon Voss, a private investigator who specialized in people who didn't want to be found. A former financial crimes investigator, meticulous and intimidating. His rate was steep, but desperation has a price. Give me 3 weeks, he said. 11 days later, Leon returned. He laid a folder on Vivian's conference room table. I found him, he said. I held my breath. Where? Scottsdale, Arizona, he said. I waited. Not just there, he continued. He relocated 2 weeks after leaving. He had a job lined up, months before departure, high-paying, Senior Development Director at Apex Land Partners. Estimated salary, nearly $200,000 a year, and... He paused, letting the words sink. He's married. I felt my stomach fall into a canyon I hadn't noticed existed. Married? Already? Yes, Leon said. 8 months after your divorce filing was underway, he married Evelyn Marr, 41 years old, founder of a commercial interior design firm, owns her primary residence outright. Net worth estimated between $6 and $9 million. I couldn't breathe. The life I had imagined for him, my husband, the man I had wronged, no longer existed in any form I recognized. He had built a new world, one that excluded me completely. I thought of Eli, my small, soft-bodied son, who had already begun to form a memory of his father's absence. Grant had arranged a life where our child was still tethered legally to him, but he had already ensured the rest of his life was insulated, thriving, untouchable. Vivian reviewed the documents regarding the LLC. The property was protected. My co-ownership had been conditional, enforceable, only if marital misconduct was not verified. She had confirmed it. The clause I signed years earlier was enforceable. I had signed my own eviction papers without knowing it. The world tilted again. Leon's next revelation landed like a brick. Grant had coordinated the divorce filing in Arizona, serving me by publication because I could not be reached. The courts had back-and-forth disputes over proper service, but ultimately the filing was recognized. Divorce finalized. I sat in that office, holding Eli, feeling as though the walls themselves were weighing on me. Grant hadn't just left. He had engineered every possible contingency, legally, morally, and financially. He had not acted out of cruelty. He had acted out of preparation. Even Declan, the man I had sought for comfort, proved useless. He called once during this period, asking half-heartedly about life advice, unaware that his existence in my story had ended as quietly as it began. I realized then the most brutal betrayals aren't the ones that scream. They are the ones that calculate, that move silently, that render you powerless before you even recognize the battlefield. And the hardest truth, I had already lost everything before Grant even walked out the door. By the time I understood the depth of Grant's planning, I had already spent weeks navigating a legal maze I hadn't known existed. Vivian Cross worked with precision, challenging the Arizona divorce filing. She argued service by publication was improper because I had a known address. The court initially agreed on a small technicality, but Grant's legal team had anticipated this. They provided detailed documentation of repeated attempts to serve me personally, showing that after multiple failures, publication was legally appropriate. The divorce was ultimately upheld. The legal system, meticulous and blind, confirmed what I had suspected. Grant had foreseen every obstacle, every potential loophole, every emotion I thought might sway him. Then came the news about Evelyn Marr. She was not just a wealthy businesswoman. She was formidable, elegant, and untouchable. Her commercial interior design firm generated $4.2 million annually. Her personal residence in Scottsdale was fully owned, valued at $1.8 million. She and Grant had married 8 months after the divorce filing began, not on a whim, not as revenge, but as the natural next step in the life he had been building quietly for months. I remember the moment Leon laid the photos on the table. Grant, standing with Evelyn at a farmer's market, holding a basket of peaches, smiling easily in the sun. He looked exactly as he had when he calmly asked me how long the affair had lasted. Steady, unburdened, calculated. I felt my stomach twist. I had imagined him struggling, lost, furious. I had imagined leverage in the form of child support, in the form of exposure, in the form of confrontation. None of it existed. He had anticipated the world I might bring against him and had neutralized it silently, legally, permanently. Vivian had already filed motions to investigate the LLC and stall any eviction or sale of the house. That bought me time. It didn't give me safety. For 14 months, I fought to regain what I thought was mine, to argue fraud or misrepresentation. The courts confirmed the deed transfer was valid. I had 60 days to leave. I moved into my mother's spare room with Eli, 2 suitcases, and a fragile illusion of stability. Child support arrived on the first of every month, a steady $2,100. Legally, fair. Financially, barely enough to cover the basics of the life I had imagined I could maintain. Even the bonus Grant had earned from the development project he'd worked on during our marriage, the one he'd claimed would secure our family's future, was structured against him, not for me. Vivian fought to recalculate child support based on that bonus. It took 8 months of legal wrangling to increase the support to $2,800 per month. Enough to help, not enough to heal. And all the while, Grant and Evelyn thrived. They had a home, a routine, and a life, carefully curated for peace and efficiency. Their Saturdays at the farmer's market, the home that smelled like fresh peaches, the firm she ran, all visible evidence that life moved on without me. What struck me most was not the wealth or the comfort or the luxury. It was Grant's face. He looked rested, unburdened, like a man who had measured the consequences, absorbed them quietly, and emerged intact. The man who once sat across from me at the kitchen table, steady, calculating, and coldly efficient, was still the same man, but now untouchable, thriving, untangled from the chaos I had created. I carried everything else. 47 choices. Eli's early months spent in my solitude. The house I once considered mine. The kitchen where we had laughed, fought, and built a family. All of it was gone. I had hired Leon thinking that finding Grant would give me leverage. It didn't. What it gave me was a photograph of the life I had destroyed. A man who had already built the consequences of my choices into every corner of his life. I could not fault him for anything illegal. Every document signed, every transfer completed, every step he had taken, legal, calculated, precise. And yet, every day, in my mother's quiet spare room, I felt the weight of all my mistakes. Every laugh Eli made, every child support deposit, every attempt at rebuilding my life was tempered by the knowledge that Grant had anticipated, countered, and outlasted me, silently and thoroughly. I had thought betrayal would be loud. I had thought it would scream. I had thought it would leave evidence everywhere I could point to and say, there, that's when everything ended. But the worst betrayals are silent. They are precise. They arrive in the form of actions taken before you even realize you are standing on the battlefield. And in that quiet, I understood what it meant to lose, not because someone wanted to hurt me, but because they had planned life better than I ever could. The years since then have been quiet, but they are not easy. I sit in the spare room at my mother's house and watch Eli sleep. His chest rises and falls with a steadiness that echoes his father's. Those eyes, Grant's eyes, look at me sometimes when he thinks I'm not watching, full of patience, careful calculation, and a trust I have no right to claim. I have rebuilt in small, deliberate ways. A job that pays the bills, a routine for Eli that gives him stability, even if it's not the life I once imagined. I paint, I cook, I tuck him into bed at night and read the same book over and over because it is the only consistency he knows. Grant does not come back. He never missed a child support payment, never sent a text, never called. The $2,800 lands in my account like clockwork, and I cannot hate it because it is fair. He does not indulge in cruelty. He acts with precision, just as he always has. Occasionally, I see glimpses of their life online, photos of Grant and Evelyn smiling at a farmer's market, baskets of peaches, their home carefully curated, their dog prancing in the sun. I recognize the man. The same steady, calculating man who asked me how long sits there, smiling, relaxed. I realize that all my expectation of dramatic emotion, the yelling, the bargaining, the apology, was naive. He does not need spectacle. He does not need my approval. He built the consequences of my choices into his life long before I ever imagined them. I am left with Eli, my son, who carries pieces of both of us in him. I am left with memories of mistakes I made with clarity, with the heavy knowledge that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. I am left with the knowledge that the worst kind of betrayal is quiet. It arrives silently, premeditated, calculated, and impossible to fight against, because it was never meant to be fought. Declan, the man I once sought for escape, has faded from my life entirely. He called once during the move into my mother's home, asking for advice about his own future, as if my life were still a reference point. I hung up, realizing the truth. He was never a partner in anything but my poor choices. I have learned that resilience is measured not in revenge, not in money, not even in child support. It is measured in the quiet, daily work of living with consequences you cannot undo. I have learned that mistakes, big, terrible, devastating mistakes, stay with you. They do not leave when the child laughs, when the deposit clears, or when you have a good day at work. I do not tell Eli about the house that is no longer ours. I do not tell him about the precision with which Grant moved forward. I do not tell him about the life his father has built that exists entirely without me. Those are truths he does not need, and I cannot take away the innocence of his childhood by dragging him into the calculus of adult betrayal. Sometimes I picture Grant in his Scottsdale home. I imagine him smiling at Evelyn, planning the week ahead, living a life that is orderly, structured, and thriving. I remember the kitchen where he once asked me, "How long?" and I feel the weight of 47 choices, 8 months of indiscretion, and the entire architecture of consequence that was always already in motion. I hired Leon because I thought finding Grant would give me power. I thought that discovery would let me reclaim something, leverage something. What I found instead was a photograph of the life I had destroyed. A man who anticipated the outcome, who acted with precision, who left me and my son alive, legally protected, but powerless to alter the course he had already set. I have spent 2 years learning what that difference feels like, from the inside. Quiet nights in a spare room, the steady rhythm of child support, Eli's patience, his eyes, his way of observing the world, my own reflection in the window as I tuck him into bed, knowing some things cannot be undone. Grant did not act out of cruelty. He acted out of preparation. And now I live with the consequences of my choices, quietly, deliberately, as every parent does when they realize that the world does not always bend for them, and that some betrayals are answered not with revenge, but with silence and meticulous, unwavering planning. It is a lesson that has cost me a home, a marriage, and a life I thought I controlled. But it has also given me something I could not have imagined, a clarity that comes from facing the consequences, and a recognition that some forms of betrayal are quieter, colder, and more permanent than any scream could ever be. Naomi Sterling, 34, mother of 1, survivor of the quietest betrayal imaginable.